Well, now it's my pleasure to introduce you Professor Robert Davies. Robert Davies is the current president of the Royal Astronomical Society, that probably is the oldest astronomical society in Europe. So it was founded in 1820, and the first president, the former president, was Sir William Herschel. So there is a long history and long interesting history behind the presence of the current president. So Professor is involved in many interesting research, mainly on extragalactic astronomy and also in the new building of instrument and telescope. Actually, he is professor at the Oxford University, but has been working in the Durham University for many years. Also, I suppose that in the building of new instrumental tools. All right? When you wish, you can start.
Thank you very much.
20 minutes.
Thank you very much. It's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation. It's an honor to be representing the Society, and especially when one is reminded of the precedents of the post. William Herschel is an extraordinarily distinguished historical figure, and it's certainly an honor to follow in his footsteps. However, I should perhaps remind you that presidents only serve for 2 years, and so there are many presidents between me and William Herschel. So I hope to give you a quick overview about what the Royal Astronomical Society does. Some of you in the room will already be members, fellows of the Society. But before I get started in my talk, I'd like to just make a couple of personal remarks. I am the Philip Whetten Professor of Astrophysics. Now, Philip Whetten is not like William Herschel or like the other named professors that you find around the place. For example, Henry Saville, my colleague Joe Silk is the professor he's named after. Henry Saville has been dead for many centuries. Philip Whetten is alive, and he is a benefactor of the University of Oxford. And one of the things I think we have to bear in mind these days is that while it's fantastic for us to have these wonderful national and European meetings where we discuss astrophysics and challenge each other on important questions in cosmology and astronomy, we also have to realize that we communicate to a much wider group. And Philip Whetten is somebody who trained as a linguist in Oxford in the 1950s and became a diplomat. And he worked for many years, he worked in Italy, for example, in Milan, as the British chargé d'affaires there. He gained an interest in astronomy, a general interest, and he took it seriously, so seriously that he bought a house in La Palma to be near the observatories there. He's well known amongst the staff of the observatory in La Palma and takes a great deal of interest in astronomy as not even as an amateur. He doesn't actually do astronomy, he's just interested in astronomy. But he's not hugely wealthy, but wealthy enough to endow the chair that I now hold. And this is just a reminder that in these days of economic strictures, I don't know about you guys, but in the UK we're certainly suffering very severe cuts in our funding for astronomy. We can communicate to a much wider audience the excitement of astronomy, and Philip is an example of the bounty that we can gain from doing that successfully. So just a personal note there, that my position here is in part due to Spain's inspiration of Philip Whetten. Okay, so the Royal Astronomical Society was founded in 1820 to encourage and promote the study of astronomy, more or less exactly the same as the Italian Society. It has actually an expanded role. Perhaps here there isn't need to say very much about this, but there is a strong geophysics thread in the Royal Astronomical Society as well, and that broadens the activities. In the UK, the Royal Astronomical Society and the Institute of Physics are the main bodies that represent the physics community to government and so on. So it's an important role alongside the Institute of Physics. We organise scientific meetings. We have 8 meetings through the winter months, from October through May. These are 1 or 2 day meetings on the second Friday of the month. Again, some of you, I'm sure, have been to these meetings. I think this is one of the principal activities that the members benefit from scientifically, Any fellow can organise these meetings, bring together a group of people. There's a modest budget to invite speakers from elsewhere. They're often they're whole-day meetings, and they're highly focused and often cover contentious matters or new initiatives that are underway in the community. We publish journals, books, and images increasingly. I'll say more about each of these things as we go through. We make awards and prizes to recognise the eminence of colleagues in a whole range of areas and career stages of astronomy. There's a very good historic library I held in my hands the other day when I was visiting the library, Copernicus's original volume. These things are inspiring to see. They're in fantastic condition, actually. That's one thing that really surprised me, how well these historic books are preserved. We support education of, in particular, graduate students through grants and outreach activities. And increasingly importantly, we represent the subject to government agencies, to international bodies, and to the research councils in the UK. So we have about 3,500 members, and one of the amazing things about the Royal Astronomical Society is that it is an international society. 1,000 of those 1,000 members are not in the UK. And so we have a membership committee which is continuously trying to improve the offer that we make to fellows to make sure that we are serving the needs of our community. And one of the issues that they are constantly trying to grapple with is how we can make a better offer to our international fellows. And if there are any international fellows here who want to give me some ideas about that, I'd very much welcome them. So you can see there are some statistics here. 15% of our members are under 34. I would certainly like to increase that fraction. 26% are retired, over 65. We have a rather modest fraction of female members, but of course this is a historic number, and you have to integrate over each year. More than 12% of the people who join are women, but over time, of course, there weren't so many women in the past, and so the total membership has a rather small fraction of women. The other aspect of the society which you need to bear in mind is that about a third, about 1,200 of the 3,500 members are actually not professional astronomers, but amateurs interested in doing astronomy from their backyard or just interested in astronomy generally. We are very fortunate because we're located in premises in Burlington House on Piccadilly. I don't know how many of you know this area, but this is actually most famously, I think, the home of the Royal Academy, which is where there are many wonderful art exhibitions presented. There is a courtyard, and around the courtyard there are 5 societies, including the Royal Academy. And so it's a little campus of learned societies in the heart of London. So the society is entirely self-funded. We don't take any money from the government, and that means that we can speak our mind, as it were. When it comes to speak truth to power, as it were, we can do that. We have a fairly substantial budget. The control of the society rests with its annual general meeting, but in between times, the council of 21 elected representatives takes responsibility for the governance. We have a range of committees that report to the council that deal with, for example, publications, which is a very intensive and takes up a lot of effort. Education, particularly where we have a school teacher always who chairs that committee to make sure that the physics curriculum, for example, in schools is appropriately taking account of developments in astronomy. We have a finance committee which is responsible for making sure, obviously, that we keep in the black. If you're independently financed, you've got to make sure that that's the case. Just to give you an indication of how important this is, the society is old, it has reserves. The reserves can be called on at times of need. Just at the moment, we are suffering quite severe cuts in the finances, in the funding for astronomy in the UK. Grants have been cut by quite a bit, so there are fewer opportunities for young scientists to take grant-funded roles because there are fewer grants. And our research council has cancelled its fellowships program for people just finishing their PhDs. Now, the society does not have the resources to replace these opportunities for young people, but we did decide to spend some of the reserves on offering 3 fellowships per year for a few years to try and cushion the blow and help the very best people to keep a career in astronomy. So we really can do things that help people in a very concrete way. We have an executive secretary, thank goodness, the president doesn't have to do everything, who takes care of the everyday business of the society, and there are 13 staff. About half of the staff are directly involved in publications. The biggest activity of the society is publishing the journals, and we have one person who edits this colour magazine, Astronomy and Geophysics, which many of you will have seen. We do interact quite closely with the other learned societies in the physical sciences, in particular those that overlap in area with our own. So obviously the Institute of Physics I've already mentioned, and the Geological Society, which is one of the other societies around the courtyard in Burlington House. And of course, we interact very strongly with the European Astronomical Society. And perhaps this is a point in the presentation where I could make a remark here about the national societies and the European Astronomical Society. I think increasingly we see our facilities being internationalized, which is fantastic. We have wonderful collaborative international facilities. The UK and Spain in particular have, as I've mentioned already, the observatories on the Canary Islands and other things. And so one is naturally inclined to ask the question, what's the role of the national astronomical societies in this era of internationalized facilities? And I think perhaps an aphorism and a saying that helps to see how this works is that a strong bridge is built on firm piers, and you need strong national societies in order to have a strong European Astronomical Society. And I think that's a useful way of viewing both kinds of organizations. We do have associations that are sort of associated with us. So there are things like inside the Royal Astronomical Society, there are specialist groups like the Astrophysical Chemistry Group. We have a UK Solar Physics Group. We have the British Geophysical Association, which is joint with the Geological Society. So we have a number of specialist groups inside the RAS that take care of particular interests. We also are the adhering body to a number of general science organisations in the UK and internationally. So, for example, there is a Science Council which represents the whole of science to the government, the Campaign for Science and Engineering, which used to have a name, used to be called Save British Science. Save British Science obviously has a slightly it has the sense that one is under threat, and to avoid that, they changed their name to the Campaign for Science and Engineering, and the Parliamentary Scientific Committee. So there are members of Parliament, I'm afraid increasingly few, who have an interest and expertise in science, and this is a joint committee between those people and members of the learned societies that get together every now and again and discuss the issues facing science. The Royal Astronomical Society represents astronomy in these fora. We are also the body that adheres to the IAU, the International Astronomical Union. The thing that you will all know most, I think, probably about the Royal Astronomical Society is the monthly notices of the society. It is a major astronomical journal. 2/3 of the content come from outside the UK. It is free to publish in, and this is fundamental to its success, I believe. In 2009, we published 20,000 pages in 36 issues. This is, of course, an increasing challenge. It's expensive business to publish these things, but the publishers, of course, are getting increasingly efficient. It's a lot cheaper to publish all these pages than it used to be. It's a lot cheaper to publish in colour than it used to be. These are things that we have been able to do, which have increased the impact of the journal without increasing the cost too much. We also publish a geophysical journal, International, and this is a leading journal in geophysics. Again, 7,000 pages in 12 monthly volumes. It's a big enterprise, having the editors and the publication team to support these endeavours. And as I've mentioned already, we publish this colour magazine, Astronomy and Geophysics, which is a more popular level. So our publications policy, as I mentioned, we don't charge. We don't charge page charges. The cost of the publication is covered by subscriptions. So the Society's income is from the subscriptions of fellows and from the subscriptions to the journals. This situation's clearly a little bit volatile, and we have to keep it under review all the time. Our finances are critically dependent on the income from the journals, and in the era of open access repositories and funding agencies wishing to make sure that publicly funded money is available, publicly funded research is available via open access, this is an increasingly complicated issue. We need to be very careful that the Society's funding remains stable if indeed it becomes the case that all publication is done on a no-cost basis. An increasing part of what we do revolves around public policy. So we respond to the government and to the research councils and to the university funding bodies and anybody else who asks us about questions relating to policy with regard to science, the physical sciences, education in the physical sciences, anything else which affects the future of astronomy. So last year, just to give you an idea, there were a number of consultations. One, for example, done by the House of Lords on how research funding priorities are set, what the mechanism is. There was a consultation by the Royal Society, securing our future prosperity. So this was addressing this so-called impact agenda. How does our activity produce benefit for society as a whole? What is the impact? One of the most serious challenges we are facing at the moment is that the government wants us to demonstrate how our activities provide the nation with economic impact. How do we make people wealthier and also happier? They have a specific agenda, and in times of economic contraction, such as now, this is becoming very important for us. We have produced a number of brochures and so on which address this, but it's going to be a continuing theme. I think we can address this successfully. We don't need to be defensive. We have a very good record, but it's not one that we're used to selling. We're used to selling more of the inspiration side of our activity rather than the innovation and economic impact side, and I think we need to do a better job of that. Again, the House of Commons last year had a review of engineering in government, and this is perhaps something that you might have not necessarily have expected an astronomical society to put an impact in, but of course our major telescopes and space missions and high-performance computing all depend on innovations in engineering. And so it's important to us that we work closely with engineers and vice versa. We actually provide, I think our subject provides some of the most exciting challenges for engineers, and one of the ways, in fact, we, as a community, that we keep able engineers supporting our work is by challenging them with very interesting and exciting problems that they find fascinating. They can usually earn a lot more money by working for somebody else, but they choose often to work in an astrophysical environment because they find it exciting. Space exploration was something which the British National Space Centre asked us to comment about their plans for, and the European Union had a consultation on the digital dividend, so-called, what do we get for from the internet and what do we get for digital repositories and so on. And all these things were things that the Royal Astronomical Society commented on. Just to bring you up to date, there have been a few things that we've done this year. The UK government formed in December of last year something called the UK Space Agency, and this year it's asked us, how's it doing? Right? They're having a review to find out how well it's doing. Well, of course, only just got started. So, in fact, this is, in fact, an opportunity for us to try and influence the structure and direction which the UK Space Agency will take, and so we've written a paper in response to that. The whole issue of space weather has caught the interest of the government, and the vulnerability of various important economic systems, communications, satellite navigation, etc., to solar activity is something which has caught the attention of even David Cameron, our Prime Minister, knows about this. And this is a subject of a consultation which the Royal Astronomical Society, with its geophysical arm largely, has been responding to. The other one which is exercising me right now is that the Society is one of the routes through which people can be nominated to serve on the review committees which will, in the next 5 years, review all university research in the UK. We have this system which was called, in 2008, the Research Assessment Exercise. The next version is going to be called the Research Excellence Framework. And we have panels which look at research across every subject, you know, from history, biology, physics, everything. And the Royal Astronomical Society is one of the bodies which nominates people to serve on the physics panel, and we're doing that right now. So we play this is an increasing role for the Society. It's one that's grown as well. Maybe 10 years ago this was a much smaller role for the Society. It didn't take on such a prominent public policy role. Now I think this is one of our major activities. Yeah, fine. I'm going to do that. We provide education and outreach, particularly through grants to university students. We offer quite a large, 2 rounds of grants a year. These are modest grants, a few £100 typically, but it's enough to send a student to a conference or a workshop, or maybe fund them to do an internship or something like that. There's a lot of outreach that Royal Astronomical Society members do. The Society itself doesn't actually add to that, except through giving a kite mark, an endorsement to particular materials for teachers. I don't know what it's like in Spain, but teachers in the UK are inundated with initiatives to teach this and that in a different way. We felt rather strongly, and we were advised by our education committee, not to add to this, but simply to indicate, what would be helpful would be to indicate to teachers which materials, particularly on the web, the Royal Astronomical Society feels are particularly helpful and well structured for education. We organise competitions for both schools and award prizes for various competitions around the country, and we have prizes for the best doctoral thesis in astrophysics and also a separate one in geophysics. We have a series of lunchtime lectures. These are at the moment only in London, or at least very largely in London, at the Society's premises in Burlington House, and we organise events for a new group of members of the Society, which we call Friends. We have just 100 and something friends at the moment. It's only been going for a few months, or maybe 15 months. The Royal Academy, which is, I already mentioned, one of our neighbour societies, has 50,000 friends. Right, so this gets me back to my original point. Astronomy has a hugely wide appeal, and we need to marshal this appeal. We have marshalled it in the past largely as cheerleaders, as supporters, but actually the people who support us more widely can be much more than that. They can lobby politicians, they can actually provide funds themselves, and so they are an incredibly important group of people to engage with and to communicate with. And of course the Society had a very high profile and extensive programme for the International Year of Astronomy. So this is my last slide. I should mention the Society's library. I've already mentioned it briefly. It's a comprehensive library, both of research journals and material, and also a historical library with many rare books and very valuable books. The Society remains the chief publication organ for UK astronomers. It's an important means through which we communicate with each other, but also with the outside world, both government and society at large. And if you want to know more about the Society, please go to our website. Thank you very much.
Question, comments?
When you produce policy papers, have they been requested by the House of Commons, the House of Lords, or they are motu proprio?
What was this last thing? Are they?
Or you do produce them because you want to produce them?
Oh no, they're in response to consultations.
They are in response.
Each one of these things, the government said, we want to probe a certain area, and they issue basically an open invitation for responses.
Who produce them?
Well, it's a combination of the officers of the society, so that's the president and the immediate staff, the secretaries, the treasurer, and the staff of the society. We have a public engagement officer. So we have the public policy officer is a new position in the society. He's just become full-time. It's Robert Massey. Some of you may have seen his material. And he writes much of this. But what he writes is input from members of the council, largely. So the council will typically have an email round robin on the issues that are being discussed, and then Robert will generate a paper. These papers are not very long because, of course, politicians don't read long papers. So, you need to be brief and to the point, and he's very good at producing material in that way.
Other question?
That's Roberto here.
So I understood that you have, 5 or 6 permanent staff, and then your incomes depends on the people. You are not sure for the future. It's not dangerous for this situation. How can you plan to pay in the next 10 years this permanent staff?
Well, we have the subscriptions of our members, and I hope they're content, and so we'll keep paying their subscriptions. And we have the subscriptions for the journal, and so they're our sources of income. As I said, about half the staff are directly responsible for the publications and are essentially paid from the publication income. The other half are largely the office staff, right? So there's a secretary and receptionist, somebody who looks after the building, and so on. So, we're an enterprise that balances income and expenditure, but does have reserves. So, and it's important. That's important. So, I think probably the answer to your question is that by appropriately marshalling our reserves, right? So, saving them when we can, and spending them when we need to, then we can be sure that we can propagate forward for a long period of time.
Okay, we thanks again, Professor Davies. We need to give you this present on behalf of the Spanish Astronomical Society. Thank you very much.